And welcome back, everyone, to episode 69 of the Sports Coverage Podcast. My name is Andrew. Unfortunately, Vince cannot join me today, but we are joined by special guest Bryan DeNovellis. He has done a lot of stuff in the New Jersey basketball, college basketball, mid-major area, which, I am very interested in. I love Princeton basketball. I love Seton Hall basketball, St. Peter's basketball, and he is here to talk about it a lot with me today. So thank you so much for joining us. And if you just want to talk about kind of other things you do, where people can find you, that would be great.
Sure, Andrew. Sure. Listen, it's a pleasure being on your podcast as someone like myself who hosts a podcast and has been involved in sports broadcasting for 30 years. I love to see your passion and I'm curious to see your knowledge about everything, and I'm sure it's pretty high up there on the spectrum. So, yeah, listen, anytime you get a chance to talk college basketball with anyone of any age, it's a thrill for me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on again. And I'm really excited to get started. So would you say we start down in Princeton with some Tigers basketball? This year, of course, wasn't necessarily the year they wanted. This was supposed to be their big year. Caden Pierce and Xavier Lee in their primes. And now we see after the season, Xavier Lee enters the transfer portal and ends up transferring away to Florida. And I was hoping, unfortunately, our last scheduling didn't really work out on that date, but I was hoping to get your input just on Xavier Lee in the transfer portal, some potential landing spots, but we saw Florida ended up being the right answer for him. So do you think that is going to end up benefiting him more in the long run than, say, St. John's or Kentucky or Kansas, where he was looking?
It's a very good question, Andrew, because when you look at, Florida's a national champion, right? So they're playing in the SEC. Would that be a better landing spot than the Big East? Here's my concern about Xavier Lee before I fully answer the question. I saw him play quite a bit over the last couple of years. And when he was out there going up against, a lot of the Ivy League competition last year, he was able to use his quickness. He was able to get by a lot of players. He was, one of the fastest players on the floor with the ball, and he's going up against guys that don't have the ball. Tore up Rutgers 2 years ago in Trenton, and he was one of the best players on the floor. And that's what really opened my eyes his sophomore year. But something happened when, after his sophomore year, he goes and tests out the NBA draft process and learns, okay, what do I need to do to get better? What do I need to do to improve my NBA stock? And he came back this year, and I thought he was selfish. I thought he was less of a team player, throwing up 20, 22 shots a game at times and just forcing a lot of things. But another thing that I noticed was the physicality, especially against a team like Yale that beat him up, physically pushed him out of the lane. And that, to me, opened my eyes. So to answer your question, I really wonder, unless he's able to put on about 10, 15 pounds of muscle this offseason, which he can, he's young and still growing. I wonder if he's going to be able to handle the physicality of the SEC. Would St. John's have been a better landing spot for him? I don't know, maybe. I mean, I know St. John's roster a lot more than I do Florida's. So he's going where he sees an opportunity to have the ball in his hands. And that's why he's going to Todd Golden. And let's face it, Andrew, he, in their eyes, in his eyes, he's the heir apparent. He is replacing Walter Clayton Jr., who was a first-team All-American, and he hopes that Todd Golden can make him a first-team All-American.
Yeah, I 100% agree with a lot of the things you mentioned. And just in casual conversation with my friends over the last couple of years about kind of Xavier Lee and how he's come up through Princeton, we've talked a lot about that physicality and how he played and how his play style changed, especially, like you said, from sophomore to junior season. The first Princeton basketball game I really watched and I really looked at was the game where he dropped 32 in Ivy League play his sophomore year. And that was really the game where he put the nation on watch. And then you look at him this year when I was fortunate enough to go cover them as media, and I see him just chucking up shots game after game. exactly like you said. I just don't know how he's going to work in a system like what Florida has or these bigger SEC schools have. Because Princeton, let's face it, they have amazing players. Their depth has been very good over the past couple of seasons, but it's not going to work like a system like Florida will, where their playbook is their playbook. They're going to be running those plays, and Xavier Lee is going to need to be a part of that and figure out where he's going to be able to make shots instead of just, hey, we're down right now. Maybe let's just take the shot, right? So I just think that
Right.
him having to play in a team like Florida is going to be a lot different than Princeton.
Anytime you're stepping up in competition, and as good as the Ivy League is, you watch a lot of the basketball. There are some very good players and very good teams, but at best, right? If those teams make the NCAA tournament, they're a 13 seed, a 12 seed. Maybe in a given year they might be an 8 or 9 seed, but that wasn't this year. So it's a major step up from going to from the Ivy League to one of the best basketball conferences in the country. So listen, he's not going to throw up as many shots. At least I don't think he is. All right. He's smart enough to know. He's a Princeton guy, right? He's smart enough to know that he needs to be a facilitator. And he's going to have to learn in that system, in Todd Golden's system, when and where and how can I get my shots? But he better be a facilitator first and a scorer second. That's going to be an adjustment because at Princeton for the last 2 years, he was a scorer first and a facilitator second. Big difference.
And I will say his average assists, average rebounds, whatever, that went up this year. But that's just him getting better and more comfortable with the type of play he was settling into. He had the 2 triple doubles on the season this year. And, his team was Caden Pierce, of course, reigning Ivy League Player of the Year. He was able to benefit from that a lot as well. But again, I completely agree with everything you're saying. And I just think Xavier Lee, especially if he goes to the draft next year, which I assume is going to be his goal, no matter really what happens next year. I just don't really know how he's going to fit into an NBA team because first of all, he's stepping up to Florida, so we'll see how it goes there. But then NBA is an entire different ballgame for a player like him who grew up in the Ivy League for his first 3 seasons. So I think that that's definitely going to be an interesting adjustment for him. And the other thing I would say is I don't know if necessarily, like stepping back a bit, I don't know if necessarily transferring this year was his best bet. I would have said what would have been my ultimate plan if I were in Xavier Lee's head would be finish out Princeton because, you're going to get a Princeton education. You're going to be able to say that you graduated from there. And then maybe if you still think your draft stock is high enough, declare there or go take your graduate year like so many other Princeton guys the last couple of years have done. Matt Alaco, Zach Martini, they've found a lot of success at Notre Dame and Rutgers. I wouldn't mind seeing Xavier Lee just try to take that extra year there. But apparently Xavier, he's going to want to take his senior year at Princeton. And he's going to probably want to draft next year.
Right. Andrew, the difference there is, listen, it's tough to keep track of eligibility. These Ivy League players who took their graduate year, that was like that extra COVID year, I believe. So they were able to play for 4 years and then Matalaco, right? And then take that 5th year, that COVID year. Unless he is going to have another year of eligibility, this will be it. So he's giving up that Princeton education, which is a shame. I thought one of the teams that he would really go after was Duke, because you're not, a Duke education certainly means more, not as much as Princeton, but it certainly does mean a lot and more than a St. John's education, more than a Florida education. It can open up more doors for you. So I think ultimately his goal is he wants to get to the NBA and he feels that Florida gives him the best opportunity to get there. And let's also face it, Andrew, I'm sure when it came down to it, Florida and St. John's, both with deep pockets, Florida being a football school, let's face it, I'm sure you got a few extra more dollars to go to Florida as well.
Yeah. And I also think it's interesting that Xavier, now with the portal closing, I believe, in the last couple of days, was the only one of those stars that's transferring out now. So Caden Pierce is now going to truly be the leader of this team that he should have been, the face of it that he should have been the last couple of years while he was being overshadowed in some ways by Lee. And I think that Caden Pierce, his play style, I think, is going to work better without Lee out there taking those shots, like we've mentioned a couple times. And I'm excited to see what he does in his senior year. I think it's going to be more similar to how he played in his sophomore year, and of course had that Ivy League Player of the Year season. And then you've guys like CJ Happy, who was starting games mid-season this year as a freshman, and he's a bigger body that Princeton has so desperately needed the last couple of years. And I'm very excited to see what he does as well and how he grows into that role, especially as a starter from his freshman year. And I guess we'll see how it keeps going for him.
Yeah, listen, you obviously watch a lot of Princeton basketball, Andrew, and I'm impressed. Pierce, to me, you're right. He was the reigning Ivy League Player of the Year. Without an inside presence of a Woma, right? Without that inside presence that they had there, Pierce, Mitch Henderson played more of a 5-out this year. And Pierce wasn't the rebounding player that we saw his first 2 years, number one. He suffered through an injury early in the season, and it clearly affected him all season. I think it was an ankle or a foot. So he wasn't the same player, but 100% healthy. If he's healthy next year, he is without question the preseason favorite to be Ivy League Player of the Year. This will be his team. And players like CJ Happy, along with another, rising sophomore, Malik Abdullahi, who I thought should have played a lot more last year. Boy, you talk about an athletic freshman who, really wasn't afraid to shoot the ball and, struggled to find his role at times. And I think, he was more of your prototypical freshman, up and down, and had some really good moments and, had some really down moments. But he's there for another year. Dalen Davis, I'd like to see him get more consistent with his shot selection and, not forcing it up as much as he has because he's a weapon. Jackson Hickey really impressed me. So Princeton has the pieces in place to once again contend for an Ivy League title. I believe when it's all said and done, they'll be preseason, 1 or 2, and they'll be one of the favorites,
Yeah, and you mentioned a lot of important things there. Malik Abdullahi, I felt bad watching a lot of the games this season because he'll get in there for the tip-off, maybe play 2 minutes, and then he gets subbed off, which was just tough to see because when he would get those minutes that he, I think, deserved throughout the season, he used them well, and he was able to get up for important rebounds. He was able to drive to the rim in ways that other guys on this team really couldn't throughout the whole year. Jackson Hickey, he started getting a lot more playing time towards the end of the season as well and ended up starting a lot as well. And I think he's heading into his junior year now because he was a sophomore last year. And I've really liked that as well. And yeah, I think you're right that this core like sophomore to junior class is going to be the driving factor for them this year with Caden Pierce at the top as a senior. He's going to be up there directing traffic, and hopefully Princeton is going to be able to rebound. Of course, they still made the Ivy tournament this year, but I think that they're going to be able to rebound in a way that we haven't really been able to see from them in the last couple of years just because of Yale's competition heating up and the unfortunate upset to Brown 2 years ago.
Yeah, leadership is going to take on a role here. Who's going to take the void? And obviously, we talked about Caden Pierce. Blake Peters was a big loss. Mitch Henderson fired 2 of his assistants at the end of the year, as you know, Andrew. So that was a big development. Brett McConnell and Lawrence Rowley both being shown the door. And Brett McConnell was somebody who was very instrumental, in he was a lead scout. He was Henderson's right-hand man, his number 1 assistant. He would do all the scouts. He was one of the guys responsible, the main recruiter who brought in Xavier Lee and Caden Pierce. So, I haven't read much or seen much about who Mitch Henderson has replaced on his staff, but those are some shoes that, while they were the scapegoats, I don't think they were the main reason why Princeton lost this year, but they were the fall guys, but they were also critical in helping build this roster. So it'll be interesting to see the dynamic of the assistant coaches and how they fit in.
Yeah, and while we're kind of on the topic of the Ivy League and Ivy League basketball and transfers as a whole, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Joe Torti, but he was a camp counselor at a sports broadcasting camp I went to last year. He's one of the UPenn announcers for Ivy on ESPN, and we talked to him a lot about college basketball in the Ivy League last year specifically, and this was before anything happened this season, of course. And we talked about Xavier Lee and Caden Pearson transfers and how that's affecting the Ivy League and NIL and all that kind of stuff, and how we think the Ivy League is going to look in a couple years. And we went back and forth on a couple things, and specifically more into NIL and how that's affecting things. So I just wanted to get your, I guess, brief take on it, because I know people can talk about this for hours and kind of how they think it's affecting the game. But I'd love to just get your brief take on NIL and Ivy League basketball.
I think that, listen, first of all, the Ivy League is a league that doesn't quote unquote give out scholarships. There is money available. They have the largest endowments of any school, so there's always money available. But it's also a league where academics is a lot more of a high priority. It is the priority. So, you're not going to these schools if you don't have the grades and you don't have the academics number one. All right. So it's not just one of these, clearly, they're going to be left out in the short term and the long term, but they're not the only ones that are going to be left out. There's a lot of other leagues that, non-football playing conferences or conferences, like the Big East with a lot of non-football schools. There are a lot of other schools, even like the A10, that are going to find it hard to compete on any level, with these football schools that have, I'm sure you heard that Kentucky reportedly had a payroll of $20 million, right? St. John's has to be up over $10 to $15 million. So I just think it's out of control. I think the Ivy Leagues will continue to get very good student athletes who are extremely bright, extremely disciplined, and want to play at that level and value the education. So I don't know if it's going to affect them recruiting, but it's going to affect them like you're seeing with a Xavier Lee or with someone like Cornell. They lost one of their big players. I forget how to pronounce his name. A.K. Okereke, I think his name was, right? He goes to Vanderbilt. So if these guys think they're any good and they're attracted by more of the money than that education that they're getting in the Ivy League, then we might see more and more of these players, bolt. And after 1 or 2 years, Danny Wolf did it, right? But, it depends. We'll see. I mean, we can talk about this for a long time, Andrew. I think the Ivy League will continue to get, quality student athletes, but, how good will these teams be? They're going to take a hit, just like a lot of teams out there.
Yeah, and I think a perfect example of the type of student athlete you're describing there is Blake Peters. You mentioned him very briefly, but he stayed all 4 years at Princeton. I think he got his degree in finance, and they mentioned on senior day that he was going to work at somewhere on Wall Street in New York or whatever. But then he's also, I'm blanking on if he broke the record or not, but the Princeton all-time 3-point holder, and he did all this stuff for the program. He was part of the Sweet 16 run, multiple Ivy tournament wins and stuff like that. And he stayed there the whole time, and he's not looking to pursue basketball, yet he was one of the most important pieces that Princeton had over the last 4 seasons. But then you're seeing other players who are treating the Ivy League as a stepping stone. You get in and you get to play D1 basketball, you get a good education, you get to start your major. Maybe you're not looking to go into basketball full time, but then you put on a show in the Ivy League, and that's your ticket to whatever other big program or even small program that you might want to go to for more exposure or more playing time or whatever you might want to get. So I think that there's definitely two sides to every coin in this instance. We're going to see guys like Blake Peters, or we're going to see guys that are looking to take this opportunity, get some playing time, get reps in, and then bolt out, which I definitely think is going to become more prevalent in the next couple of seasons.
Yeah, you're going to see that. And especially until there's some type of salary cap, until there's some type of, contracts, 2-year contracts that these players get, it's the money, right? 2-3 years ago, $400,000 was what the top players were getting in the transfer portal. 3 years ago, $500,000. Now, $400,000 in the transfer portal gets you, a reserve player on a lower mid-major team. And you're seeing the best players get 3, 4, 5 million, 7 million. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's only the elite players. You're not going to see, every Ivy League roster lose 5 players every year. It's certainly not going to happen.
Yeah. UPenn specifically this year, I think they're already down. I think I saw 2 big transfers, and I'm sure they're losing some other players here and there. So there's definitely some rosters each year that seem to be taking a hit. We saw Cornell a couple of years ago. They lost some big guys this year. UPenn seems to be taking the big hit. And yeah, I'm excited to watch Ivy League ball. Listen, I love it. I think that there's just a different sense of energy within some of these programs, and I love getting to talk about it with people who know about it as well, because I just think that's such an underrated part of NCAA basketball. And it was great to talk to you about the Ivy League.
Yeah, my pleasure. And look out for Penn in a couple of years, right? Their prodigal son came back, Fran McCaffrey, and we know he can coach. We know he's a winner. We know he can recruit. So maybe he gets Penn back to where they were.
Yeah. And real quick before we wrap up, I kind of forgot to mention this, but if we could talk about some Rutgers real quick, I guess more on the bigger side of New Jersey basketball. But they just got their center in the transfer portal. I'm not sure if you saw that earlier today. They fall from, where is he from? Kansas State. And the center position is what they were missing this season. It's what they were going to be missing heavily going into next year. Of course, they're losing Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. So that's obviously would be their biggest pitfall there. But it looks like they're starting to have some success in the transfer portal for the first time, really, since we've seen the transfer portal be available to them. And I don't know. Do you think that they're going to have a strong team next year?
They need a scorer. You just don't lose, 2 all Met players, right? One of the best point guards in the country, 2 of the top 3 players, freshmen in the country, and Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper. They're losing a huge chunk of scoring. They lost Jeremiah Williams, right? They lose Jordan Durkak. I mean, they lost a ton of players. They're bringing back Dylan Grant. They're bringing back young players. Bryce Dorch, who I liked a lot. Who's going to score for them next year? They at some point, Steve Peichel needs a go-to player. He needs a Geo Baker. He needs a Ron Harper Jr. He needs someone to put the ball in their hands. Otherwise, this scoring by committee is not going to work. I like Jamichael Davis. I think he's a nice player. Tariq Francis coming over from NJIT. Huge step up for him. Scored 19 points a game at NJIT. But he's a little, on the small side, and also he was a volume scorer. Had to take a lot of shots. Was not a high percentage 3-point shooter or field goal percentage shooter. So I think it's still to be seen where their scoring is going to come from.
Yeah, and you mentioned a lot of big players: Lathan Somerville, Jeremiah Williams, Jordan Durkak, and then Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper. And I'm going to be honest, Rutgers basketball was not my top priority this season, although preseason everyone was thinking that they were going to go pretty deep, either into the Big Ten tournament or into even the NCAA tournament. And really the only time I got to really watch them was Princeton versus Rutgers at the Prudential Center pretty early on in the season. And that was, first of all, I'll say that was a very fun game. That was amazing atmosphere. I love seeing New Jersey basketball come together like that. But I just mentioned those 5 players. Those are really the only 5 players whose names were being heard over the PA that entire game. And it was a rough game for Rutgers especially, who thought, oh, we're going to be the kings of New Jersey. We're going to be the kings of the Big Ten even going into that season. And now they're falling pretty flat on their face to Princeton, who played amazing that game. Caden Pierce, especially with the last shot there to seal the game for them, was outstanding. But just the way Rutgers played that game with all of these amazing players, was just disappointing to watch, and I left feeling disappointed that they didn't even have a shot to run away with this game, really, even though in the first half they were up by as much as I think 15 or 20. And I don't know, Rutgers basketball, they have some work to do. I'm happy that they're finally utilizing this transfer portal correctly, and I'm happy that maybe they're going to get some of those players back, but you're entirely right. They don't have anyone who could really chuck up a three and hopefully get some points on the board for them going into next season.
They need to get two scoring guards, whether it's a wing and a two guard, whatever it is. They lost, I think, like 8 out of their top 9 scorers from last year, whether it was graduation or to the NBA. We're even talking about like guys like PJ Hayes and guys like Tyson Acuff, who weren't generally big scorers or big shooters, but they had moments. Even you have to replace them. So look, last year everything went wrong for Rutgers. And now this year, Steve Peichel is doing it with more of guys who are like him, right? 1 and 2 star players, guys who defend, guys who grind, not your blue chip players, and trying to, win with stars. But at some point, Andrew, you need scoring. And when I look up and down this roster, I don't know where their scoring is going to come from right now, because they're young, they're unproven, or they're transfers who did well at other levels. There's no big time scorer on this roster right now. All right. So too many question marks right now for what I like this Rutgers roster to be like.
Yeah, 100%. It's going to be a season that I don't think that they were expecting to have a year after having 2 of the best players in college basketball last season. No matter what their record showed or whatever, they were still amazing, and they still showed out exactly as they were expected to. Just Peichel couldn't bring the team around them. I guess he couldn't get them into a system where they would get them the ball every time and they would make the correct shots. They would play defense correctly, and it was just kind of almost sad to watch at some point throughout the season when they have these 2 generational talents and they're not utilizing them correctly. So I was disappointed, to say the least, with what happened last season. And I'm just hoping that something important can happen this season where they don't end up not being the Kings of New Jersey, despite having one of the best teams that we've seen in a long time from them.
That was an epic failure, Andrew. Without question. And I know people live too much in the present, but in terms of Rutgers basketball history, that was the most hyped season and the most disappointing season ever. And now to follow it up with, if they don't make the NCAA tournament next year, all right, Peichel is going to start hearing it a lot more. His seat is going to get a lot hotter. And, there's a lot of question marks around this roster. There's a lot of question marks around Rutgers University as a whole right now, without a general manager, without an athletic director, without a president. There's a lot of what ifs, and Rutgers fans, are getting a little antsy. They're already mad. They're already ticked off that they didn't make the NCAA tournament this year with what was supposed to be their best roster ever. And now they're looking at this roster that's being built and they're saying, this is it. So I hope, listen, it's only April, right? I hope that they find some players out there in the portal that can help score and help bring some veteran presence in this Rutgers team and make them competitive and put them, in the discussion for an NCAA tournament bid. But right now, no chance. I don't see it.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember last August even, we knew the Elite Eight was going to be in New Jersey in the Prudential Center, which of course it still was. And I mean, my friends and I are thinking we might see our home state really represented here. There's a chance that they could go far. There's a chance that this could be one of the best teams Rutgers has ever had. And that was just disappointing. It was everything you said. Is exactly what Rutgers fans were thinking all season, exactly what Rutgers fans are thinking now, and it's tough to watch, really. But before we wrap up real quick, I would just love to get some quick thoughts on St. Peter's basketball. I was able to make it out to one game this year. Tight game against Rider, which they ended up winning in the last couple seconds, which was definitely something cool to see, and it was one of their won real wins this season. It was disappointing, and their players from the Elite Eight team are pretty much all gone now. And this was really the last season of that era of St. Peter's basketball, and it was an epic disappointment, especially with now for the first time the bottom three teams not even making the MAAC tournament. So just some quick thoughts on a rebuild there before we wrap up would be awesome.
So here's the problem. We talked about NIL earlier, right? And I don't know what St. Peter's NIL situation is, but I can tell you right now, last year, they were one of a handful of teams, 3 or 4 teams that didn't have NIL money that I knew of. Unless they get some type of NIL money, it's going to be hard to compete even in a conference like the MAC, because Iona has money. They have a general manager. We saw what they did with Tobin Anderson and firing him and bringing in an NBA guy as their head coach. So Iona has money. Siena has money. Quinnipiac has money. Fairfield has money. Sacred Heart has money. So St. Peter's lost one of their best players in Mohamed Sow to the transfer portal. They lost Armani Ziegler to the transfer portal. They lost their leading scorer, Marcus Randolph.
Yes. Yep.
Right? They lost him to graduation. So 2 players that I like returning on their roster. I love Bryce Eaton. He is a gamer. I saw him play against Seton Hall and Rutgers, and I think they have something in him, and I think he's ready to take that step up from freshman to sophomore year. He had a very good freshman year, averaged 10 points a game, had a career high 27 against Sacred Heart. I like Eaton. I also like Zakir Williamson, kid out of Philly, 6'7". So those are the 2 key pieces for Bashir Mason, Bryce Eaton and Zakir Williamson. They're going to defend. That anytime you play St. Peter's, you'd rather have a root canal. You'd rather have some wisdom teeth pulled, because you're going to the dentist chair. You are going to have to just grind out a game in the 50s or 60s. And when you defend like that, and when you play under Bashir Mason's system, it gives you a chance to win. So I never count out the Peacocks, even though other teams are more talented. We've seen them, win a conference tournament multiple times in the last couple of years. So in the last 4 years. So they're a work in progress. They have some pieces. I just think they need more.
Yeah, and I think that can be said for a lot of the teams that both you and I like to watch and like to cover in this area.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of in-betweens for a lot of teams, I would say, besides Princeton, who's really, it's go time still off of their most recent successes and stuff like that. But I think Seton Hall, who we unfortunately ran out of time to talk about, we know what happened with their season this year. They're in a tough conference, it's going to be like that. St. Peter's, like you said, they just lost a bunch of guys to the transfer portal, but there's a young core there that can really do a lot in the next couple of years. And then Rutgers, who, of course, we mentioned lost a lot of their great players as well, but they're looking to rebuild in the next couple of years. So I'm excited for the future. I think that there's a lot that we can see happen here in the next couple of years. If you have any closing remarks before we head out of here, that would be awesome.
These are my closing remarks, Andrew. I think this is troubling times for New Jersey college basketball fans, because you're not talking about major NIL programs. You're talking about, this is an era where there are haves and have-nots. And right now, Rutgers, Seton Hall, St. Peter's, Princeton, Rider, Fairleigh Dickinson, who am I missing? NJIT. These are have-nots.
Mm-hmm.
They're all have-nots. Okay, even though Seton Hall's in the Big East and Rutgers is in the Big Ten, they're have-nots, because unless they're able to produce and generate, the revenue of these other football programs, all right, these major power conference teams that they're competing against, the teams with more money are more often going to be able to buy the players they want. And it doesn't always translate into wins, but it gives you a better chance. The playing field is unlevel right now. So that is my concern. Will Seton Hall, will Rutgers Will Princeton, will they be able to keep their heads above water? Or is this a trend that is going in a direction that we don't want it to go as New Jersey college basketball fans? We're going to see.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Mr. DeNovellis, for joining me. If you want to check him out, he is on Twitter and he has a wonderful podcast, the Tri-State College Basketball Podcast. Go check it out. Some awesome interviews there with a lot of the guys you mentioned in this episode. And I love getting to listen to them. I loved hearing some of the insights he got to hear from some of these players. And thank you so much again for joining me. If you want to plug anything else, go ahead.
I want to plug you, Andrew, because I am very impressed. All right. When let's put it this way, okay? It's not often that adults like myself get emails from 15-year-olds who aspire to be sports broadcasters and who aspire to be a podcaster or anything in sports broadcasting. So I had a feeling that you would be knowledgeable. I had a feeling that you would be polished and you would know your material. And you checked all the boxes, Andrew. All right. So I'm very impressed with how you handled things, how you navigated, and you controlled this interview. It's not many 15-year-olds who can do that. So keep doing what you're doing, keep following your passion, keep hosting these podcasts, and you're going to go places. All right. So it was a pleasure being on with you today. Keep up the great work.
Thank you so much. Well, that's going to do it for episode 69 of the Sports Coverage Podcast. My name is Andrew. You could check out everything over on our Instagram, on our X, on our TikTok, wherever you might want to find us. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening to this episode. Thank you again, Mr. DeNovellis, for joining me, and we'll see you all next week.